Mysterious story of Henry Cavendish, the reclusive genius of the 18th century, whose silence roared louder than the greatest scientific discoveries of his age. In the bustling city of London, amidst the clamor of coach wheels and ringing church bells, lived a man who was barely seen and even less heard. A man whose presence was a whisper and whose genius was a storm. Sir Henry Cavendish. If you had visited his massive estate, you wouldn't have found signs of life. The curtains drawn, doors shut, visitors unwelcome. And if you dared to enter, you'd find a peculiar instruction for the servants. Avoid speaking, place the food, and leave. This was the home of a man so reclusive, he avoided eye contact, so brilliant, he weighed the earth with a pendulum. Born in 1731 into aristocracy, Henry Cavendish had every privilege, titles, estates, education. But what he sought was not power or wealth. He wanted truth, not in the political halls of England, but in the hidden laws of nature. From a young age, he was strange and withdrawn. Even at Cambridge, he avoided all social activities. He had no interest in friends, no taste for popularity. All he wanted was to observe, measure, and understand. His notebooks, later found in his estate, contained tens of thousands of pages of experiments, measurements, calculations, nearly all of which he never published. Why? Because he didn't care if the world knew. He only cared if nature revealed her secrets to him. In a candlelit laboratory cluttered with glass tubes, mercury columns, and handwritten scrolls, Cavendish quietly made history. While others debated ideas in salons, he isolated a strange, light gas, flammable, invisible, and floating. He called it inflammable air. Today, we call it hydrogen. But he didn't stop there. Mixing it with oxygen, he noticed tiny droplets forming on the glass. This air, when burned, produces water. He had just discovered the composition of water, a mystery that had confounded minds for centuries. And yet, he published it only briefly, casually, without celebration. There were no lectures, no announcements, just silence, mystery. In 1797, Cavendish performed the most ambitious experiment of his life. Inside a sealed room, away from every human eye, he constructed what looked like an absurd contraption. Two massive lead balls suspended by wires, creating tiny forces of attraction. Using meticulous care and an impossible level of patience, he observed the twisting of a wire, the barely noticeable deflection caused by gravity. What he did was extraordinary. He calculated the mass and density of the Earth, without satellites, without computers. He weighed the planet by watching a swinging wire. And still, no speeches, just a line in his notes. I have determined the density of the Earth to be 5.448. Centuries later, modern science confirmed it. He was almost exactly correct. Cavendish's presence was like a ghost in scientific circles. He was a member of the Royal Society, yet rarely spoke. When he did, it was with short, barely audible sentences. He was afraid of women, so much so that if a maid accidentally entered his line of sight, he'd flee the room. He communicated with his housekeeper only through written notes. His meals were selected by writing numbers on a menu to avoid verbal interaction. And his funniest quirk? If someone annoyed him by talking too much, he'd turn and mutter, "I'm not used to being spoken to." When Cavendish died in 1810, the world thought it had lost a quiet aristocrat with some scientific curiosity. But decades later, when physicist James Clerk Maxwell examined Cavendish's papers, he was stunned. Cavendish had discovered the very things I'm only now describing mathematically, Maxwell wrote. Buried in those yellowed pages were early versions of Ohm's law, Dalton's atomic theory, and Coulomb's law. Cavendish had discovered them all before the scientists credited with them. But because he never published, history moved on without his name. He didn't care. He never cared. Henry Cavendish's story is not one of fame, applause, or dramatic revolutions. His is a story of pure curiosity, a fire that burned quietly, steadily, and endlessly. He teaches us that true genius doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through candlelight, scribbles on parchment, and a quietly swinging pendulum. In a world obsessed with attention, Cavendish's ghost reminds us, some of the greatest discoveries are made not in crowds, but in silence.